Welcome, dear friend. I know you watched this video to fall asleep. So before that, like, comment, and share this video. Also, where are you from? And what time is it where you are from? Have you ever found yourself lying awake at 3 in the morning, your mind racing through an endless loop of what-ifs, regrets, and scenarios that may never come to pass? You're not alone. In fact, overthinking has become the silent epidemic of our generation, stealing our peace, sabotaging our relationships, and turning our minds into prisons we can't escape from. But what if I told you that over 2,500 years ago, a prince who gave up everything to find the truth discovered 108 profound teachings that could completely transform your relationship with your thoughts? These aren't just philosophical concepts gathering dust on library shelves. These are practical, life-changing insights that have helped millions of people break free from the tyranny of overthinking and discover a peace so deep it transforms everything. Tonight, I'm going to share these 108 Buddhist teachings with you, but here's what makes this different from every other self-help video you've watched. We're not just going to scratch the surface, we're going to dive deep into the actual practices, the real techniques, and the profound wisdom that can shift your entire experience of being human. By the end of this journey, you won't just understand why your mind won't stop racing. You'll have the tools to finally make it stop. And here's the thing that most people don't realize about overthinking. It's not actually about the thoughts themselves. The Buddha discovered something revolutionary about the nature of mind that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to understand. Your thoughts are not you. They're simply mental events arising and passing away like clouds in the sky of your awareness. But we've been conditioned to believe we are our thoughts, and that's where all the suffering begins. So before we dive into these 108 teachings, let me share something that might completely change how you see your mind. Right now, as you're watching this video, notice that there's a part of you that's aware of your thoughts. There's something deeper than the mental chatter that's observing the mental chatter. The Buddha called this your true nature, and accessing it is the key to everything we're going to explore together. The first teaching that changed everything for me personally was this simple yet profound insight. The mind that thinks and the mind that knows it's thinking are two completely different things. Most of us spend our entire lives identified with the thinking mind, never realizing there's this vast, peaceful awareness that exists beyond all the mental noise. This awareness doesn't overthink because it doesn't need to. It simply knows. Let's start with teaching number 1, and this one alone has the power to transform your relationship with every thought you'll ever have. The Buddha taught that suffering is not caused by pain itself, but by our resistance to what is. When you're caught in overthinking, you're not just thinking about problems. You're resisting the present moment so intensely that your mind creates elaborate stories, scenarios, and solutions for situations that exist only in your imagination. Here's what this looks like in real life. You send a text to someone you care about, and they don't respond immediately. The thinking mind immediately jumps into action. Maybe they're angry with me. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe they don't care about me anymore. Maybe they're talking to someone else about what I said. And on it goes. But here's the truth that will set you free. None of these thoughts are actually about the present moment. They're all about imaginary futures or interpreted pasts. The Buddha's solution was elegantly simple yet profoundly effective. Instead of fighting these thoughts or trying to think your way out of thinking, you learn to recognize them as what they are: temporary mental phenomena with no more substance than smoke. This recognition alone begins to dissolve their power over you. Teaching number 2 builds directly on this foundation. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of all suffering. But here's what most people misunderstand about attachment. It's not about caring deeply about people or things. It's about the desperate clinging, the need for things to be different than they are, the inability to accept what's actually happening right now. When you're overthinking, you're usually attached to some outcome. You're attached to being right, to being understood, to controlling how others perceive you, to avoiding discomfort. to making the perfect decision. This attachment creates a tension in your mind that keeps the thinking loop spinning endlessly. The more attached you are to a particular outcome, the more your mind will generate thoughts trying to secure that outcome. But what happens when you practice non-attachment? Your mind begins to relax. The desperate quality of thinking starts to fade. You can still care deeply, still take appropriate action, still engage fully with life, but without the frantic mental energy that comes from needing things to be different than they are. This brings us to teaching number 3, which reveals something profound about the nature of thoughts themselves. The Buddha discovered that thoughts arise from emptiness and return to emptiness. They have no solid, permanent existence. They're like bubbles forming and popping on the surface of water. The water itself remains undisturbed. Think about this for a moment. Where do your thoughts come from? You don't manufacture them consciously. They simply appear in awareness. And where do they go when they're finished? They dissolve back into the same awareness from which they arose. Understanding this begins to change your entire relationship with thinking. Instead of being caught up in the content of thoughts, you begin to recognize their empty, insubstantial nature. Teaching number 4 introduces us to one of the most practical aspects of Buddhist wisdom. The understanding that craving and aversion are two sides of the same coin. When you're overthinking, you're usually either craving something you don't have or trying to avoid something you don't want. Your mind becomes a problem-solving machine, constantly generating thoughts to help you get what you want or avoid what you fear. But here's the insight that changes everything. Both craving and aversion keep you trapped in mental loops because they're based on the illusion that your happiness depends on external circumstances. The Buddha taught that true peace comes from neither craving nor avoiding, but from a profound acceptance of what is, combined with skillful action when action is needed. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. It means developing the wisdom to know when mental activity is helpful and when it's just spinning your wheels. Most overthinking falls into the latter category. It's mental activity that creates the illusion of doing something productive while actually keeping you stuck in suffering. Teaching number 5 reveals something that might surprise you about the nature of problems. The Buddha taught that most of our problems exist only in our thinking about them. When you examine your direct, immediate experience right now, without the overlay of mental commentary, how many actual problems do you have? Not problems you're thinking about, but problems that exist in this precise moment. This teaching doesn't minimize real challenges or suggest that difficulties don't exist. Instead, it points to the fact that we often multiply our suffering by creating mental problems on top of actual situations that need to be addressed. The situation itself might require attention, but the mental elaboration around it usually just creates more suffering without offering any real solutions. Teaching number 6 introduces us to the concept of impermanence, one of the Buddha's most liberating insights. Everything in existence is constantly changing. Your thoughts, your emotions, your circumstances, your relationships, your body, even your sense of self, are all in constant flux. Nothing remains static or permanent. This teaching is particularly powerful when applied to overthinking because it reveals that whatever you're mentally wrestling with right now will inevitably change. The situation you're worried about, the emotion you're trying to avoid, the problem you're trying to solve, even the pattern of overthinking itself, are all temporary phenomena that will pass. When you truly understand impermanence, it becomes much easier to hold your experiences lightly. You realize that you don't need to solve every problem or understand every situation perfectly because everything is already in the process of changing. This understanding brings a natural relaxation to the mind and reduces the urgent, driven quality that characterizes most overthinking. Teaching number 7 builds on this by introducing the concept of the middle way. The Buddha discovered that extreme approaches to dealing with mental suffering rarely work. If you try to forcefully stop your thoughts, you create more tension. If you indulge every thought that arises, you reinforce the patterns that create suffering. The middle way involves neither fighting thoughts nor feeding them, but learning to observe them with detached awareness. This middle way approach to overthinking is revolutionary because it removes the struggle that usually makes the problem worse. Instead of trying to think your way out of overthinking, you learn to step back into the awareness that observes thinking without being caught up in it. This awareness is always peaceful, always present, and always available to you. Teaching number 8 reveals something profound about the relationship between thoughts and identity. The Buddha taught that what we call the self is actually a collection of ever-changing processes rather than a solid, permanent entity. Most overthinking is driven by the ego's attempts to maintain and protect an identity that doesn't actually exist in the way we think it does. When you begin to see through the illusion of a solid, separate self, the urgent quality of most thinking begins to fade. You realize that there's nothing that needs to be constantly defended, maintained, or improved through mental activity. This doesn't mean you become careless or irresponsible. Instead, you act from a place of natural wisdom rather than ego-driven compulsion. These first 8 teachings form the foundation for everything else we're going to explore together. They begin to shift your understanding from seeing thoughts as solid realities that need to be managed to recognizing them as temporary phenomena arising in the vast space of awareness. This shift in perspective is the beginning of true freedom from overthinking, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface of what these ancient teachings have to offer. As we continue this journey together, each teaching will build on the last, creating a comprehensive understanding of how your mind works and how you can work with it more skillfully. The path to inner peace isn't about eliminating thoughts or achieving some perfect state of mental stillness. It's about developing a fundamentally different relationship with the activity of your mind, one based on wisdom, compassion, and deep understanding rather than struggle and resistance. Teaching number 9 introduces us to one of the most liberating concepts in all of Buddhist psychology, the understanding that you are not responsible for the first thought, but you are responsible for the second. What does this mean exactly? What does? When a thought arises in your awareness, you didn't consciously create it. It simply appeared like a bird landing in a tree. But what you do with that thought, whether you feed it with attention, elaborate on it, or let it pass naturally, that's entirely within your control. This teaching is revolutionary because it removes the guilt and shame that often accompany unwanted thoughts. You don't need to judge yourself for having anxious thoughts, angry thoughts, or repetitive thoughts. These are simply mental phenomena arising in awareness, but you can learn to choose which thoughts you engage with and which ones you allow to pass by, like clouds in the sky. Teaching number 10 reveals something that most people never realize about the nature of worry. The Buddha taught that worry is always about something that isn't happening right now. Think about this carefully. You can't actually worry about the present moment because the present moment simply is what it is. All worry is either about something that happened in the past or something that might happen in the future. And here's the profound insight. Neither the past nor the future exist anywhere except in your thinking about them. When you're caught in worry, you're essentially using your imagination to create suffering. You're taking your precious life energy and directing it towards scenarios that exist only as mental constructs. The Buddha's solution wasn't to never think about the future or learn from the past, but to recognize when you've crossed the line from practical planning into suffering-inducing mental elaboration. Teaching number 11 introduces the concept of mindfulness, but not in the way most people understand it. True mindfulness isn't about concentrating intensely or forcing yourself to focus. It's about developing a quality of gentle, open awareness that can hold whatever arises without being overwhelmed by it. When you're truly mindful, you're not trying to change or control your experience. You're simply being present with whatever is happening. This kind of mindfulness is particularly powerful when dealing with overthinking because it allows you to observe the thinking process without getting caught up in the content of thoughts. You begin to see that thoughts are just one aspect of your experience, no more important or real than the sounds you're hearing or the sensations in your body. This broader perspective naturally reduces the hypnotic power that thoughts often have over us. Teaching number 12 reveals why most attempts to stop overthinking actually make the problem worse. The Buddha taught that what you resist persists. When you try to forcefully stop your thoughts or push them away, you're actually giving them more energy and attention. It's like trying to calm turbulent water by hitting it with a stick. The very effort to make it calm creates more turbulence. The alternative approach is counterintuitive, but incredibly effective. Instead of resisting overthinking, you learn to welcome it with curiosity and compassion. You might say something like, "Oh, here's that familiar pattern of worry again. I wonder what it's trying to tell me." This gentle, accepting attitude begins to defuse the charge around overthinking and allows it to naturally settle on its own. Teaching number 13 introduces us to the profound wisdom of non-doing. The Buddha discovered that many of our problems are actually created by our attempts to solve them. This is especially true with overthinking. The more you think about thinking, the more thinking you create. The more you analyze your mental patterns, the more complex those patterns become. Sometimes the most skillful action is no action at all. This doesn't mean becoming passive or disengaged. It means learning to recognize when mental activity is helpful and when it's just creating more suffering. There's a natural intelligence in your mind that knows how to solve problems when solutions are available and how to rest when no action is needed. Trusting this intelligence is often more effective than forcing solutions through endless mental activity. Teaching number 14 reveals something surprising about the relationship between thinking and feeling. Most people believe that their thoughts create their emotions, but the Buddha taught that it's often the other way around. Emotions arise first and then thoughts come along to justify or explain those emotions. This understanding changes everything about how you work with difficult mental states. When you're caught in overthinking, instead of trying to think your way out of it, you might ask yourself, "What am I feeling right now?" Often you'll discover an underlying emotion, like fear, sadness, anger, or loneliness that's driving all the mental activity. When you address the emotion directly with compassion and acceptance, the compulsive thinking often settles naturally. Teaching number 15 introduces the concept of right effort, which is one of the most misunderstood aspects of Buddhist practice. Right effort doesn't mean trying harder or pushing yourself more intensely. It means applying just the right amount of energy to any given situation, like tuning a guitar string. Too tight and it breaks, too loose and it won't make music. Right effort is about finding that perfect balance between engagement and relaxation. When applied to overthinking, right effort means neither indulging every thought that arises, nor fighting against the thinking process. It's about maintaining a gentle, persistent awareness that can observe thoughts without being carried away by them. This quality of balanced attention is something you can cultivate through practice, and it becomes one of your most valuable tools for working with any kind of mental suffering. Teaching number 16 reveals why comparison is one of the most destructive forms of thinking. The Buddha taught that comparing your inner experience to others' outer appearances is a recipe for suffering. When you're overthinking, you're often caught in comparisons. Why can't I be as calm as that person? Why do I worry so much when others seem so carefree? Why is this so hard for me when it seems easy for everyone else? But here's what you can't see. Everyone has an inner world of thoughts and feelings that you never have access to. The person who appears calm on the outside might be struggling with the same mental patterns you are. The Buddha taught that suffering is universal, but so is the capacity for peace. Instead of comparing your struggles to others' apparent ease, you can recognize that you're part of a larger human family, all learning to work with the challenges of having a human mind. Teaching number 17 introduces us to the power of loving kindness, not just toward others, but toward your own thinking mind. When you're caught in overthinking, your relationship to your own mind often becomes adversarial. You judge your thoughts, resist your mental patterns, and create an internal war that only generates more suffering. The Buddha taught that this internal conflict is optional. What would it be like to treat your overthinking mind the way you would treat a frightened child? With patience, understanding, and gentle guidance rather than criticism and force. This shift in attitude often accomplishes what years of fighting against your thoughts could never achieve. When your mind feels safe and accepted, it naturally begins to relax and settle. Teaching number 18 reveals something profound about the nature of problems and solutions. The Buddha taught that the mind that creates a problem cannot solve that same problem. This is why overthinking rarely leads to genuine solutions. The worried mind can only create more worry. The anxious mind can only generate more anxiety. Real solutions come from a different quality of awareness entirely, one that's spacious, clear, and unattached to any particular outcome. This teaching points to the importance of stepping out of the problem-solving mode when you're caught in mental loops. Instead of trying to think your way to peace, you learn to access the peaceful awareness that already exists within you. From this place of natural clarity, appropriate actions arise effortlessly when they're needed. Teaching number 19 introduces the concept of interdependence, which reveals why isolated thinking often leads to confusion and suffering. Nothing exists independently, including your thoughts and problems. Everything arises in relationship to countless other factors. When you try to understand situations through isolated thinking, you're working with incomplete information, which naturally leads to confusion and ineffective solutions. The alternative is to cultivate a more holistic awareness that can hold complexity without needing to reduce everything to simple, linear cause and effect relationships. This broader perspective often reveals solutions that weren't visible from the narrow focus of overthinking, and it naturally reduces the urgency and anxiety that drive compulsive mental activity. Teaching number 20 brings us to one of the most practical insights in all of Buddhist wisdom, the understanding that most suffering comes from wanting reality to be different than it is. When you examine your overthinking closely, you'll usually find this wanting at its core. You want the situation to be different. You want other people to behave differently. You want your own mind to work differently. You want the past to have unfolded differently, or you want the future to be more certain. But what happens when you stop wanting reality to be different and start working skillfully with reality as it is? This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on positive change. It means distinguishing between acceptance of what is and wisdom about what actions be helpful might moving forward. This distinction is crucial because it allows you to respond to life from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. The profound shift happens when you realize that your peace doesn't depend on your circumstances being perfect. Teaching number 21 reveals this liberating truth. Peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of wisdom in relationship to whatever arises. The Buddha discovered that you can experience deep tranquility even when your external situation is challenging, uncertain, or completely different from what you wanted. This teaching transforms everything about how you approach difficult situations. Instead of waiting for your problems to be solved before you can be at peace, you learn to find peace within the midst of complexity. This doesn't mean becoming complacent or avoiding necessary action. It means acting from a centered, clear state of mind, rather than from anxiety and desperation. Teaching number 22 introduces us to the revolutionary concept that your thoughts about a situation are not the situation itself. This seems obvious, but most people live as if their mental commentary about reality is reality. When you're overthinking, you're essentially mistaking your map for the territory. Your thoughts about your relationship are not your relationship. Your thoughts about your future are not your future. Your thoughts about yourself are not who you really are. This distinction is life-changing because it allows you to step back from the convincing story your mind is telling and connect directly with what's actually happening. Often you'll discover that the actual situation is much more manageable than the mental version of it. The real challenge isn't usually the circumstances themselves, but the elaborate mental constructions you've built around those circumstances. Teaching number 23 reveals why trying to control your thoughts is like trying to control the weather. The Buddha taught that thoughts arise according to conditions, just like clouds form according to atmospheric conditions. You can influence the conditions that give rise to thoughts, but you cannot directly control which thoughts appear in your awareness. This understanding removes the frustration that comes from trying to manage your mental content directly. Instead of trying to control your thoughts, you can learn to influence the conditions that support peaceful states of mind. Regular meditation creates conditions for clarity. Physical exercise creates conditions for mental balance. Time in nature creates conditions for perspective. Meaningful relationships create conditions for emotional stability. Working with conditions is much more effective than trying to micromanage individual thoughts. Teaching number 24 introduces the concept of beginner's mind, which is one of the most powerful antidotes to overthinking. When you approach situations with beginner's mind, you're open to fresh possibilities rather than trapped in familiar mental patterns. Most overthinking is actually repetitive thinking. Your mind gets stuck in well-worn grooves, running the same scenarios over and over without ever arriving at genuine insight. Beginner's mind breaks these patterns by approaching each moment with curiosity and openness. Instead of assuming you already know what's going to happen or how you should feel about something, you allow yourself to be surprised by reality. This quality of openness often reveals solutions and perspectives that were invisible when you were trapped in habitual thinking patterns. Teaching number 25 reveals something profound about the relationship between effort and ease. The Buddha taught that the most effective action arises from a state of relaxed alertness rather than tense striving. When you're overthinking, you're usually in a state of mental tension, trying to force solutions through sheer mental effort. But forced solutions rarely address the root of problems, and they often create new complications. The alternative is learning to act from a place of natural responsiveness. When your mind is relaxed and alert, appropriate actions arise organically without the sense of struggle that characterizes most overthinking. This doesn't mean becoming lazy or disengaged. It means trusting the natural intelligence that emerges when you're not forcing outcomes through mental manipulation. Teaching number 26 introduces us to the wisdom of timing. The Buddha understood that everything has its natural rhythm and pace. Some situations require immediate action, while others need time to unfold. Some problems have solutions that are available right now, while others require patience and gradual development. Most overthinking arises from trying to force solutions according to your timeline, rather than reality's timeline. Learning to sense the natural timing of situations is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Sometimes the most skillful response is to act immediately. Sometimes it's to wait and observe. Sometimes it's to plant seeds for future possibilities. When you align your actions with natural timing, rather than forcing outcomes according to your mental demands, life becomes much more effortless and effective. Teaching number 27 reveals why perfectionism is one of the most destructive forms of overthinking. The Buddha taught that attachment to perfection creates suffering because perfection, as the mind conceives it, doesn't exist in the natural world. Everything in nature is beautifully imperfect, constantly changing, and perfectly suited to its circumstances without needing to be flawless. When you're caught in perfectionist thinking, you're essentially at war with reality, because reality is inherently imperfect from the mind's perspective. This creates endless mental loops as you try to figure out how to make yourself, your work, your relationships, or your circumstances perfect. The liberation comes from embracing what the Japanese call wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and impermanence. Teaching number 28 introduces the concept of skillful means, which is about choosing the most effective response to any given situation rather than applying rigid rules or formulas. Different types of overthinking require different approaches. Sometimes the skillful response is to engage with your thoughts analytically. Sometimes it's to ignore them completely. Sometimes it's to feel the emotions underneath the thinking. Sometimes it's to take concrete action. Developing skillful means requires cultivating sensitivity to what each situation actually needs, rather than defaulting to habitual responses. This sensitivity comes from practice and experience, but it also comes from learning to trust your deeper wisdom, rather than relying solely on mental analysis to determine the best course of action. Teaching number 29 reveals something surprising about the nature of clarity. Most people believe that clarity comes from having all the information and understanding every detail of a situation. But the Buddha taught that true clarity often comes from not knowing, from being comfortable with uncertainty and mystery. When you're overthinking, you're usually trying to achieve certainty through mental activity. But this often leads to more confusion rather than genuine understanding. The alternative is learning to rest in not knowing as a form of openness rather than ignorance. From this open, receptive state, genuine insights arise naturally without being forced through mental effort. This kind of clarity is often more accurate and useful than the pseudo-certainty that comes from excessive analysis. Teaching number 30 introduces us to the power of presence as an alternative to mental time travel. The Buddha recognized that suffering occurs when consciousness is out of phase with reality. When your mind is in the past or future, while your body is in the present, you experience a fundamental disconnection that manifests as anxiety, depression, or restless thinking. Presence isn't about forcing yourself to focus on the present moment. It's about recognizing that the present moment is the only place where life actually happens, where real solutions are available, and where peace can be found. When you align your awareness with the present moment, overthinking naturally subsides, because there's nothing to overthink about reality as it actually is right now. Teaching number 31 reveals why most mental suffering is optional. The Buddha distinguished between pain and suffering, teaching that pain is inevitable, but suffering is created by your relationship to pain. When something difficult happens, there's often unavoidable pain involved. But the mental elaboration around that pain, the stories you tell yourself about what it means, the resistance you create to experiencing it fully, that's where suffering is generated. This teaching is particularly relevant to overthinking because most mental loops are forms of optional suffering. You take a painful or challenging situation and multiply it through mental activity until what started as simple pain becomes complex suffering. Learning to experience pain directly without mental elaboration often reveals that the actual experience is much more manageable than the mental version of it. Teaching number 32 introduces the concept of witnessing consciousness, which is perhaps the most important discovery you can make about your own mind. The Buddha taught that there's an aspect of your awareness that simply observes whatever arises without being affected by it. This witnessing consciousness is always peaceful, always present, and never caught up in the drama of thinking and feeling. Most people never discover this witnessing consciousness because they're completely identified with the content of their experience, rather than the awareness in which all experience arises. But when you begin to recognize this deeper dimension of your being, everything changes. You realize that no matter what your mind is doing, there's always a place of refuge available within your own awareness. Teaching number 33 reveals why gratitude is one of the most powerful antidotes to overthinking. When you're caught in mental loops, you're usually focused on what's wrong, what's missing, or what might go wrong. This negative focus creates a downward spiral that generates more problems to think about. Gratitude breaks this cycle by shifting your attention to what's actually working in your life. But the Buddha taught a deeper form of gratitude than simply counting your blessings. True gratitude is recognizing the miraculous nature of existence itself. The fact that you're alive, that you have the capacity for awareness, that you can experience beauty and love and connection. These are extraordinary gifts that most people take completely for granted. When you touch this deeper gratitude, most problems reveal themselves to be relatively small in the context of the larger miracle of being alive. Teaching number 34 introduces us to the understanding that most overthinking is actually underfeeling. When difficult emotions arise, instead of experiencing them directly, many people escape into mental activity. They think about the emotion, analyze it, try to understand why they're feeling it, judge themselves for having it, or create elaborate strategies for avoiding it in the future. All of this mental activity serves as a buffer against actually feeling what needs to be felt. The Buddha taught that emotions are simply energy in motion, and like all energy, they naturally move through your system when you don't resist them. Most emotions, even very difficult ones, will pass through you in a matter of minutes if you allow them to be felt fully without mental interference. But when you escape into thinking about the emotion instead of feeling it, you can stay stuck in the same emotional pattern for days, weeks, or even years. Teaching number 35 reveals the profound difference between reacting and responding. When you're caught in overthinking, you're usually in state, a reactive, automatically triggered by circumstances, according to conditioned patterns. Reactions are unconscious, immediate, and often disproportionate to the actual situation. They're driven by past conditioning rather than present wisdom. Responding, on the other hand, comes from conscious choice. There's a pause between stimulus and response where awareness can assess the situation and choose the most skillful action. This pause is where your freedom lies. You cannot always control what happens to you, but you can learn to control how you respond to what happens to you. This capacity to respond rather than react is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Teaching number 36 introduces the concept of energy management as it relates to mental activity. The Buddha understood that you have a finite amount of mental and emotional energy each day, and how you use that energy determines the quality of your experience. Overthinking is incredibly energy intensive, often leaving you feeling drained and depleted without having accomplished anything meaningful. When you learn to use your mental energy more skillfully, directing it toward activities that actually serve your well-being and goals, you have more energy available for what matters most. This means being selective about which thoughts you engage with, which problems you spend time analysing, and which mental activities you allow to consume your precious life force. Teaching number 37 reveals why surrender is often more powerful than struggle. When you're overthinking, you're usually in a state of mental struggle, fighting against reality, trying to force solutions, or resisting what's happening. This struggle creates enormous tension and rarely leads to effective outcomes. Surrender doesn't mean giving up or becoming passive. It means aligning yourself with reality rather than fighting against it. From a state of surrender, you can see situations more clearly because you're not distorting them through the lens of resistance. You can act more effectively because your actions arise from wisdom rather than reactivity. And you can experience peace, even in challenging circumstances, because you're not adding the extra layer of suffering that comes from wanting things to be different than they are. Teaching number 38 introduces us to the profound wisdom of interconnectedness. The Buddha taught that nothing exists in isolation. Everything arises in relationship to everything else. This understanding has powerful implications for how you work with overthinking, because it reveals that your mental patterns don't exist independently of the larger context of your life. Your thoughts are influenced by your physical health, your relationships, your environment, your daily habits, your spiritual practices, and countless other factors. Instead of trying to fix your thinking directly, you can work with these supporting conditions. Sometimes the most effective way to address mental turbulence is to get better sleep, spend time in nature, have an honest conversation with someone you trust, or engage in physical exercise. Teaching number 39 reveals the importance of distinguishing between productive thinking and mental spinning. Not all mental activity is problematic. Some thinking is genuinely useful for planning, problem solving, creative expression, and learning. The key is developing the discernment to recognize when your mental activity is serving a useful purpose and when it's just creating suffering without accomplishing anything constructive. Productive thinking has certain characteristics. It's focused, time-limited, and leads to either insight or action. Mental spinning, on the other hand, is repetitive, endless, and creates more confusion rather than clarity. Learning to recognize the difference allows you to engage with useful thinking while stepping back from mental activity that serves no beneficial purpose. Teaching number 40 brings us to the understanding that peace is not something you achieve, but something you are. Most people approach inner peace as a goal to be reached through effort and practice, but the Buddha taught that peace is the natural state of awareness when it's not disturbed by mental activity. You don't need to create peace, you need to remove the obstacles that obscure the peace that's already present. This shift in understanding changes everything about spiritual practice. Instead of trying to become peaceful, you learn to recognize and rest in the peace that's always available. Instead of fighting against disturbance, you learn to let disturbances pass through awareness without being caught up in them. This natural peace is not dependent on external circumstances and cannot be destroyed by challenging situations. Teaching number 41 reveals something that might shock you about the nature of wisdom itself. The Buddha discovered that true wisdom often appears as not knowing rather than having all the answers. When you're overthinking, you're usually trying to know everything, understand every angle, predict every outcome, and control every variable. But this desperate need to know often prevents you from accessing the deeper intelligence that emerges from openness and receptivity. Real wisdom knows when to think and when to stop thinking. It knows when to analyze and when to simply be present. It knows when to plan and when to trust the natural unfolding of life. This wisdom doesn't come from accumulating more information or thinking harder about problems. It emerges from a quality of spacious awareness that can hold uncertainty without anxiety and complexity without confusion. Teaching number 42 introduces us to the revolutionary concept that your problems are not actually problems until you think about them problematically. This sounds like a riddle, but it points to something profound about how suffering is created. Every situation in life is fundamentally neutral until your mind assigns meaning to it. The meaning you assign determines whether you experience that situation as a problem to be solved or simply as another aspect of life to be lived. When you change your relationship to circumstances from "this is a problem that shouldn't be happening" to "this is what's happening right now, and I can work with it skillfully," the entire experience transforms. The external situation might remain exactly the same, but the internal experience shifts from resistance and struggle to acceptance and responsive action. Teaching number 43 reveals why most people remain trapped in cycles of overthinking, despite genuinely wanting to be free. The Buddha taught that we become attached not just to pleasant experiences, but also to familiar forms of suffering. Overthinking, despite being painful, provides a sense of identity and purpose for many people. It makes them feel productive, important, and engaged with life, even when it's actually preventing them from living fully. Breaking free from overthinking often requires grieving the loss of this familiar identity. Who would you be if you weren't constantly worried about something? What would you do with your time if you weren't always analysing and planning and trying to figure everything out? These questions can feel threatening because they challenge your fundamental sense of self. But on the other side of this identity crisis lies genuine freedom. Teaching number 44 introduces the concept of emotional alchemy, which is the art of transforming difficult emotions into wisdom and compassion. When you're caught in overthinking, you're usually trying to avoid feeling something uncomfortable. But the Buddha taught that emotions, no matter how difficult, contain important information and energy that can be channeled constructively. Instead of thinking your way around difficult emotions, you can learn to feel them fully while maintaining awareness. This direct experience of emotion without mental elaboration often reveals exactly what action needs to be taken or what understanding needs to be gained. The emotion itself becomes a doorway to wisdom rather than a problem to be solved through mental analysis. Teaching number 45 reveals something surprising about the relationship between thinking and intuition. Most people believe these are opposing faculties, but the Buddha understood that they can work together harmoniously when properly balanced. Overthinking often occurs when the rational mind tries to do work that belongs to intuitive wisdom, like understanding people's motivations, knowing what decision to make in complex situations, or sensing the right timing for action. Learning to trust your intuitive intelligence doesn't mean abandoning rational thinking. It means using each faculty for what it does best. The rational mind is excellent for analysing information, making logical connections, and planning concrete steps. Intuitive wisdom is better for understanding the bigger picture, sensing what's truly important, and knowing how to respond to situations that can't be figured out through analysis alone. Teaching number 46 introduces us to the profound practice of loving what is, which goes beyond mere acceptance. When you're overthinking, you're essentially at war with reality. You're using your mental energy to fight against what's already happening, hoping that through enough mental effort, you can somehow change what has already occurred, or prevent what might occur. Loving what is doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up your power to influence outcomes. It means bringing an attitude of fundamental friendliness to whatever is happening right now. This friendliness creates a relaxed, open quality of mind that can see situations clearly and respond wisely. When you stop fighting reality, you have much more energy available for working skillfully with whatever reality presents. Teaching number 47 reveals why most attempts to think positively actually increase mental suffering. The Buddha taught that forced positivity is just another form of resistance to what is. When you try to replace negative thoughts with positive ones, you're still operating from the assumption that your peace depends on having the right thoughts. This creates a subtle form of mental violence where you're constantly monitoring and manipulating your mental content. True positive thinking isn't about forcing optimistic thoughts. It's about maintaining a fundamentally positive relationship to existence itself, regardless of what thoughts happen to be arising. This deeper positivity can hold both pleasant and unpleasant experiences with equal grace because it's based on trust in life rather than attachment to particular mental states. Teaching number 48 introduces the concept of skillful doubt, which is different from the destructive doubt that fuels overthinking. Destructive doubt questions everything in a way that creates paralysis and confusion. It doubts your abilities, your worth, other people's intentions, and life's basic goodness. This kind of doubt is based on fear and separation. Skillful doubt, on the other hand, questions assumptions, beliefs, and mental patterns that might be limiting your freedom and happiness. It asks whether your thoughts are actually true, whether your worries are realistic, whether your mental habits are serving you. This kind of doubt is motivated by love of truth rather than fear of life, and it leads to greater clarity and wisdom rather than more confusion. Teaching number 49 reveals something profound about the relationship between solitude and overthinking. Many people avoid being alone with themselves because they're afraid of what their minds might do without external distractions. But the Buddha taught that learning to be peacefully alone with yourself is one of the most important skills you can develop. When you can be comfortable in your own presence without needing to fill the space with mental activity, you discover a quality of contentment that doesn't depend on external stimulation. This inner contentment naturally reduces the compulsive quality of thinking because you're no longer using mental activity to avoid the discomfort of being with yourself. Teaching number 50 introduces us to the art of conscious breathing as a foundation for mental clarity. The Buddha recognized that the breath is always available as an anchor for awareness, a way of returning to the present moment when the mind has wandered into past or future. But conscious breathing is more than just a relaxation technique. It's a way of harmonizing mind and body, of creating coherence between your mental and physical experience. When you're overthinking, your breathing often becomes shallow and irregular, which reinforces mental agitation. By consciously returning to deep, rhythmic breathing, you create a physiological foundation for mental calm. The breath becomes a bridge between the thinking mind and the deeper wisdom of the body. Teaching number 51 reveals why gratitude practices often fail to address overthinking. Many people try to use gratitude as a mental technique, forcing themselves to think grateful thoughts in order to feel better. But the Buddha taught that genuine gratitude is not a thinking practice at all. It's a way of being that emerges naturally when you recognize the extraordinary gift of existence itself. True gratitude doesn't require thinking about all the things you should be grateful for. It arises spontaneously when you step back from mental preoccupation and simply notice that you're alive, that you're aware, that you're connected to this miraculous web of existence. This recognition often stops overthinking immediately because it puts everything into perspective. Teaching number 52 introduces the concept of energy awareness as it relates to mental activity. The Buddha understood that different types of thinking have very different energetic qualities. Some thoughts are light, spacious, and energizing. Others are heavy, contractive, and depleting. Learning to sense these energetic differences allows you to become more discriminating about which thoughts you choose to engage with. When you notice that certain thought patterns consistently leave you feeling drained or agitated, you can begin to withdraw your energy from those patterns. This isn't about suppressing thoughts, but about consciously choosing where to invest your precious life force. Over time, thoughts that don't receive energetic investment naturally fade away. Teaching number 53 reveals something revolutionary about the nature of personal responsibility. When you're overthinking, you often feel responsible for things that are completely outside your control, while neglecting the things that are actually within your influence. The Buddha taught the importance of understanding the difference between what belongs to you and what belongs to life itself. You are responsible for your responses, your choices, your attitudes, and your actions. You are not responsible for other people's reactions, external outcomes, past events, or future circumstances. This clear understanding of responsibility eliminates enormous amounts of unnecessary mental activity and allows you to focus your energy where it can actually make a difference. Teaching number 54 introduces us to the profound practice of befriending uncertainty. Most overthinking is driven by intolerance for not knowing what's going to happen. The mind generates endless scenarios and contingency plans in an attempt to create a sense of security in an inherently uncertain world. But the Buddha taught that uncertainty is not the enemy of peace. Resistance to uncertainty is. When you learn to be comfortable with not knowing, a whole dimension of mental suffering simply disappears. You can make decisions without knowing all the outcomes. You can take action without guarantees. You can love without knowing if love will be returned. This comfort with uncertainty is not indifference or recklessness. It's a mature recognition that life is inherently mysterious and that trying to eliminate mystery through mental effort is futile. Teaching number 55 reveals why most people remain stuck in patterns of overthinking, despite understanding these teachings intellectually. The Buddha distinguished between intellectual understanding and embodied realization. You can understand something perfectly with your mind, while continuing to act from old patterns, because true change happens at a deeper level than thinking. Embodied realization occurs when understanding moves from your head to your entire being. It's not something you think about, but something you are. This kind of realization usually happens gradually through practice and experience, rather than through sudden intellectual insights. It requires patience and compassion with yourself as new ways of being slowly integrate into your daily life. Teaching number 56 introduces the concept of natural rhythm as it applies to mental and emotional life. Just as nature has cycles of activity and rest, expansion and contraction, your inner life also has natural rhythms. Sometimes it's natural to be more mentally active, processing information and making plans. Sometimes it's natural to be quiet and receptive. Overthinking often occurs when you fight against these natural rhythms, trying to be mentally active when your system needs rest, or forcing yourself to be still when you need to move and think. Learning to sense and honor your natural rhythms reduces the friction between what you're trying to do and what your system actually needs in any given moment. Teaching number 57 reveals something profound about the relationship between self-compassion and mental clarity. When you're harsh and critical toward yourself for overthinking, you create additional layers of mental activity. You think about your thinking, then judge yourself for thinking about your thinking, then worry about your tendency to judge yourself. This creates complex cycles of meta-thinking that can be more problematic than the original thoughts. Self-compassion breaks these cycles by providing a stable, loving presence that can hold all of your mental activity without judgment. From this compassionate presence, you can observe your thinking patterns with curiosity rather than criticism, which naturally reduces their compulsive quality and allows them to settle more easily. Teaching number 58 introduces us to the art of skillful questioning. Most overthinking involves asking the wrong questions, or asking questions in ways that generate more confusion rather than clarity. Questions like, why does this always happen to me? Or, what if everything goes wrong? Create mental loops that spiral into more suffering. Skillful questions, on the other hand, open up new possibilities and direct your attention towards solutions and understanding. Questions like, what can I learn from this situation? Or what would love do here? Or, what's the most skillful response available right now? Itil naturally guide your mind toward wisdom rather than worry. Teaching number 59 reveals why most people find meditation difficult when they're caught in patterns of overthinking. They approach meditation as another mental task, trying to control their thoughts or achieve particular states of mind. But the Buddha taught that meditation is actually about learning to be comfortable with whatever arises in awareness without needing to change or control it. When you stop trying to meditate correctly and simply rest in whatever is happening, meditation becomes effortless. Thoughts can come and go, emotions can arise and pass, sensations can change and shift, and all of this is simply the natural activity of being alive. Your job is not to control this activity, but to remain present with it in a relaxed, open way. Teaching number 60 introduces the concept of spiritual maturity as it relates to working with difficult mental states. Spiritual immaturity tries to transcend or eliminate all uncomfortable experiences. Spiritual maturity learns to include everything that arises with wisdom and compassion. This doesn't mean indulging negative thoughts or emotions, but it does mean developing the capacity to be present with the full spectrum of human experience. When you can be with anxiety without being anxious about being anxious, when you can notice overthinking without thinking about your overthinking, when you can feel sadness without making yourself wrong for feeling sad, you discover a quality of equanimity that remains stable regardless of what's happening in your mental and emotional experience. Teaching number 61 reveals something surprising about the relationship between action and overthinking. Many people believe that thinking more will lead to better action, but the Buddha taught that excessive thinking often prevents effective action. When you're caught in mental loops, you're using energy that could be directed toward actually doing something constructive about your situation. Sometimes the most skillful response to overthinking is simply to take one concrete step in direction. This doesn't have a positive to be the perfect step or the complete solution. It just needs to be a real action that moves you forward in some small way. Often, taking action breaks the spell of mental paralysis and restores your sense of agency and effectiveness. Teaching number 62 introduces us to the profound understanding that your worth is not determined by your mental performance. When you're caught in overthinking, you often believe that your value as a person depends on figuring everything out, making the right decisions, understanding complex situations, or maintaining control over your mental and emotional states. But the Buddha taught that your essential worth is inherent and unchanging. It doesn't depend on how well you think, how much you accomplish, how others perceive you, or how successfully you manage your inner experience. This recognition of inherent worth provides a stable foundation that isn't shaken by temporary difficulties or mental turbulence. Teaching number 63 reveals why most people struggle with the concept of letting go. They imagine that letting go means becoming passive, uncaring, or disengaged from life. But the Buddha taught that true letting go is actually the foundation for more skillful engagement. When you're not clinging desperately to particular outcomes, you can respond to situations more flexibly and creatively. Letting go doesn't mean not caring. It means caring without attachment, acting without desperation, engaging without clinging. This quality of non-attached engagement often leads to better outcomes than forced effort because it allows you to perceive situations more clearly and respond more appropriately to what's actually needed. Teaching number 64 introduces the concept of witnessing difficult emotions without being consumed by them. When challenging feelings arise, the immediate impulse is often to either suppress them or become completely identified with them. The Buddha taught a third option, maintaining awareness of the emotion while recognizing that you are larger than any particular feeling state. This witnessing presence doesn't try to change or fix the emotion. It simply provides a stable, compassionate awareness within which the emotion can be fully experienced and naturally processed. From this witnessing perspective, even very difficult emotions become workable because you're not fighting against them or drowning in them. Teaching number 65 reveals something profound about the relationship between individual healing and collective well-being. When you're caught in overthinking, you might believe that your mental struggles are purely personal problems that don't affect anyone else. But the Buddha understood that individual consciousness and collective consciousness are intimately connected. When you find peace within yourself, you contribute to peace in the world. When you break free from patterns of mental suffering, you make it easier for others to do the same. Your inner work is not selfish, but serves the larger healing that our world desperately needs. This understanding can provide additional motivation for addressing your own patterns of overthinking. Teaching number 66 introduces us to the art of conscious choice-making as an alternative to decision-making through excessive analysis. When you're overthinking, you often try to make decisions by thinking through every possible angle, weighing all the pros and cons and attempting to predict all possible outcomes. But the Buddha taught that the wisest decisions often come from a deeper source than rational analysis. Conscious choice-making involves gathering necessary information through thinking, but then stepping back into a spacious awareness that can sense what feels most aligned with your deepest values and wisdom. This doesn't mean making impulsive decisions, but it does mean trusting the intelligence that emerges when you're not forcing outcomes through mental effort. Teaching number 67 reveals why many people remain attached to their suffering despite genuinely wanting to be free. The Buddha observed that familiar suffering can feel safer than unknown freedom, at least when you're worried or anxious or mentally preoccupied. you feel like you're doing something about your problems, even when that mental activity isn't actually helpful. Freedom from overthinking can initially feel disorienting because it challenges your familiar sense of identity and purpose. Who are you when you're not constantly analysing and worrying? What do you do with your time when you're not mentally rehearsing scenarios? This transition requires patience and self-compassion as you discover new ways of being that aren't based on mental struggle. Teaching number 68 introduces the concept of energetic boundaries as they relate to mental and emotional well-being. Just as you have physical boundaries that protect your body, you also need energetic boundaries that protect your mental and emotional space. Many people absorb the anxiety, negativity, and mental chaos of others without realizing it, which can trigger their own patterns of overthinking. Learning to maintain clear, energetic boundaries doesn't mean becoming closed or insensitive to others. It means developing the capacity to remain centered in your own awareness, even when you're surrounded by agitated or negative energy. This skill is particularly important in our hyper-connected world, where we're constantly exposed to other people's mental and emotional states through media and technology. Teaching number 69 reveals something surprising about the relationship between creativity and overthinking. Many people believe that creative work requires intense mental effort and analysis, but the Buddha understood that the most profound creativity emerges from a state of relaxed awareness rather than forced thinking. When you're trying too hard to be creative, you're usually accessing the same rational, analytical part of your mind that creates overthinking. True creativity flows from a deeper source that can only be accessed when the controlling mind relaxes and allows something new to emerge. This is why many artists and innovators report that their best ideas come when they're not trying to think of them. Teaching number 70 introduces us to the profound practice of meeting each moment fresh, without the overlay of past experience or future projection. Most overthinking occurs when you approach present situations through the filter of memory and anticipation. You assume you know what's going to happen based on what happened before, or you imagine future scenarios based on current fears and desires. When you meet each moment with fresh awareness, you discover that reality is much more fluid and responsive than your mental models suggest. People can surprise you, situations can evolve in unexpected ways, and solutions can emerge that weren't visible when you were trapped in familiar thinking patterns. This freshness of perception is naturally available when you're not lost in mental time travel. Teaching number 71 reveals why most people find it difficult to trust life itself. When you're overthinking, you're essentially saying that you don't trust life to unfold appropriately without your constant mental management. You believe that through enough thinking and planning and worrying, you can somehow control outcomes and prevent problems. But the Buddha taught that life has its own intelligence that far exceeds the capacity of individual thinking. This doesn't mean becoming passive or irresponsible, but it does mean recognizing that your role is to respond skillfully to what arises rather than trying to control what arises. This trust in life's intelligence can provide tremendous relief from the burden of trying to manage everything through mental effort. Teaching number 72 introduces the concept of natural confidence, which is very different from the ego-based confidence that many people strive for. Ego-based confidence depends on external validation, past achievements, or comparison with others. It's fragile and requires constant reinforcement through mental activity and performance. Natural confidence, on the other hand, is based on recognizing your fundamental okayness, regardless of external circumstances or personal performance. It doesn't depend on being better than others or achieving particular goals. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that you can handle whatever life presents, not because you have all the answers, but because you have the capacity to respond wisely to whatever arises. Teaching number 73 reveals something that completely transforms how you relate to your own mental activity. The Buddha discovered that most people are unconsciously addicted to the drama of their own thinking. Even when thoughts create suffering, there's something compelling about the mental stories, the emotional intensity, and the sense of being the central character in an ongoing psychological drama. This addiction to mental drama explains why so many people return to overthinking even after experiencing periods of peace. The quiet mind can initially feel boring compared to the stimulating chaos of constant mental activity. Breaking free from this addiction requires recognizing that peace isn't empty or lifeless, but rather full of a different kind of richness that can only be appreciated when you stop being intoxicated by mental drama. Teaching number 74 introduces us to the revolutionary understanding that your thoughts are not personal. This might sound strange because thoughts seem to arise in your individual mind, but the Buddha taught that most thoughts are actually impersonal phenomena arising from collective conditioning, cultural programming, and universal human patterns. When you realize that the anxious thought isn't your anxious thought, but simply an anxious thought arising in awareness, something profound shifts. You stop taking thoughts so personally, which immediately reduces their emotional charge. The thought about being inadequate isn't a personal failing, it's a common human thought pattern. The worry about the future isn't your unique burden, it's a universal human tendency. This depersonalization of thinking is incredibly liberating. Teaching number 75 reveals why most meditation instruction actually makes overthinking worse for beginners. Traditional meditation often emphasizes concentration, focus, and controlling the mind, which reinforces the very mental effort that creates overthinking in the first place. The Buddha's original approach was much gentler and more natural. True meditation is more like learning to rest in your natural awareness, rather than trying to achieve particular states of mind. It's about discovering the peace that's already present, rather than creating peace through effort. When you approach meditation with this understanding, it becomes a refuge from mental activity, rather than another form of mental work. Teaching number 76 introduces the concept of emotional intelligence as it relates to overthinking. Most people have been taught to value intellectual intelligence while neglecting the wisdom of emotions. But emotions contain crucial information about your needs, values, boundaries, and authentic responses to situations. When you learn to read emotional information directly, instead of translating everything into mental concepts, you often discover that what seemed like complex problems requiring extensive analysis are actually simple situations calling for straightforward emotional responses. The anxiety might be telling you that you need more rest. The anger might be indicating that a boundary has been crossed. The sadness might be pointing towards something that needs to be grieved. Teaching number 77 reveals something profound about the relationship between humility and mental peace. When you're overthinking, you're often trying to figure out things that are beyond the capacity of individual thinking to understand. You're attempting to predict complex futures, understand other people's motivations completely, or solve problems that don't actually have clear solutions. Intellectual humility recognizes the limitations of thinking and analysis. It acknowledges that there are many aspects of life that can't be figured out through mental effort. This humility isn't a form of giving up, but rather a mature recognition that allows you to use thinking when it's helpful, while resting in not knowing when thinking isn't adequate to the situation. Teaching number 78 introduces us to the art of conscious transitions as an alternative to the mental habit of living in the past or future. Most people spend transition times, the spaces between activities, lost in mental activity about what just happened or what's coming next. But these transition moments are actually opportunities to return to presence and interrupt patterns of compulsive thinking. Whether you're walking from one room to another, waiting in line, or sitting in your car before going into a building, these small moments can become anchors for awareness. Instead of automatically filling them with mental activity, you can use them as opportunities to breathe, notice your surroundings, and return to the simple experience of being alive. Teaching number 79 reveals why most people find it difficult to receive support for their mental struggles. When you're caught in overthinking, you often believe that you should be able to solve everything yourself through mental effort. Asking for help can feel like admitting failure or weakness, but the Buddha taught that isolation often reinforces mental suffering, while connection can provide the perspective and support needed for healing. This doesn't mean becoming dependent on others for your mental well-being, but it does mean recognizing that healing often happens in relationship rather than in isolation. Sometimes simply speaking your circular thoughts out loud to a trusted friend can reveal their insubstantial nature in a way that internal analysis never could. Teaching number 80 introduces the concept of sacred ordinary as an antidote to the mind's tendency to make everything into a problem. When you're overthinking, ordinary experiences get filtered through mental commentary that either dismisses them as insignificant or turns them into sources of worry and analysis. But the Buddha taught that ordinary moments, when met with full presence, reveal extraordinary depth and beauty. The taste of water when you're thirsty, the feeling of sunlight on your skin, the sound of rain on the roof. These simple experiences can provide more satisfaction and peace than hours of mental problem solving. Learning to find the sacred in the ordinary naturally reduces the mind's compulsive search for something more interesting or meaningful. Teaching number 81 reveals something surprising about the relationship between physical health and mental peace. The Buddha understood that mind and body are not separate entities but aspects of one integrated system. When your body is depleted, stressed, or out of balance, your mind naturally becomes more agitated and prone to overthinking. This means that sometimes the most effective way to address mental loops is through physical care rather than mental strategies. Regular sleep, adequate nutrition, physical movement, time in nature, and other forms of body care create the physiological foundation for mental clarity. When your nervous system is regulated and your body feels safe, your mind naturally settles into a more peaceful state. Teaching number 82 introduces us to the profound practice of blessing your challenges rather than cursing them. When difficult situations arise, the immediate response is usually resistance, complaint, or mental strategies for escape. But the Buddha taught that challenges often carry hidden gifts that can only be received when you meet them with an attitude of openness rather than resistance. This doesn't mean pretending that difficulties are pleasant or denying the reality of pain. It means recognizing that growth often requires challenges and that your current difficulty might be exactly what you need for your next level of development. This shift in perspective can transform a source of overthinking into an opportunity for wisdom and strength. Teaching number 83 reveals why most people remain trapped in cycles of seeking rather than finding genuine contentment. When you're overthinking, you're usually seeking something: security, understanding, control, approval, or certainty. But the Buddha taught that the seeking mind can never find what it's looking for because it's always focused on what's missing rather than what's present. Contentment isn't found by acquiring what you think you need, but by recognizing the completeness that's already available in this moment. This doesn't mean becoming complacent or abandoning healthy goals, but it does mean finding fulfillment in the process of living rather than postponing happiness until all your mental questions are resolved. Teaching number 84 introduces the concept of energetic alignment as it relates to decision-making and life direction. When you're overthinking about major life choices, you're usually trying to figure out the right decision through mental analysis. But the Buddha taught that the wisest choices often come from sensing what feels most aligned with your deepest nature and values. This alignment can be felt in your body, your energy, and your overall sense of rightness about a direction. When you're moving in alignment with your authentic nature, there's usually a sense of flow and ease, even when the path is challenging. When you're moving against your nature, there's often internal friction and resistance that no amount of mental justification can resolve. Teaching number 85 reveals something profound about the relationship between acceptance and change. Many people resist acceptance because they believe it means becoming passive or giving up on positive change. But the Buddha taught that acceptance is actually the foundation for effective change, because it allows you to see situations clearly without the distortion of resistance. When you fully accept what is, you can respond to it skillfully. When you're fighting against reality, you're wasting energy that could be directed toward constructive action. Acceptance doesn't mean liking everything that happens or becoming indifferent to outcomes. It means working with reality as it is rather than as you wish it were. Teaching number 86 introduces us to the art of conscious communication as an alternative to the mental rehearsals that often precede difficult conversations. When you need to have an important conversation, the tendency is often to script it out mentally, anticipating what the other person will say and preparing your responses. But this mental preparation usually creates more anxiety than clarity. The alternative is to enter conversations with presence-icity rather than authent, and with predetermined agendas and rehearsed responses. This requires trusting your natural intelligence and communication skills rather than trying to control outcomes through mental preparation. Often the most meaningful exchanges happen when both people are present and responsive rather than following mental scripts. Teaching number 87 reveals why most people find it difficult to trust their own experience over expert opinions and external authorities. When you're overthinking, you're often seeking the right answer from outside sources rather than trusting your own direct experience and inner wisdom. But the Buddha taught that external teachings can only point toward truth. They cannot provide truth itself. This doesn't mean ignoring valuable guidance or expertise, but it does mean developing confidence in your own capacity to discern what's true and helpful for your unique situation. Your direct experience is always more, and theories reliable than concepts, even very sophisticated ones, because you are the only expert on what it's like to be you. Teaching number 88 introduces the concept of natural timing as it applies to personal healing and growth. When you're struggling with overthinking, there's often an urgency to fix the problem immediately. But the Buddha understood that genuine transformation often happens according to its own organic timeline, rather than according to mental demands and expectations. This means being patient with your own healing process while still taking appropriate action to support your growth. Some insights need time to integrate. Some patterns need to be worked with gradually rather than forced to change quickly. Some aspects of healing happen in their own season, and trying to rush the process through mental effort often creates more resistance than progress. Teaching number 89 reveals something surprising about the relationship between vulnerability and strength. When you're overthinking, you're often trying to protect yourself from potential hurt, rejection, or failure by mentally preparing for every possible scenario. But this mental armor often prevents the very connections and experiences that would provide genuine security and fulfillment. The Buddha taught that true strength comes from the willingness to be open and authentic, rather than from the ability to protect yourself from all possible harm. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the courage to show up as you really are, without guarantees about how others will respond. This openness often creates deeper connections and more authentic experiences than mental strategies for self-protection. Teaching number 90 introduces us to the profound practice of witnessing the thinking process itself, rather than getting caught up in the content of thoughts. Most people are so identified with their thoughts that they never step back far enough to observe the actual process of thinking. But the Buddha taught that this observing awareness is always present and always peaceful. When you learn to witness thinking as a process, you discover that thoughts arise and pass away, like weather patterns in the sky of awareness. You begin to see that you are not the thinker, but the awareness in which thinking occurs. This shift in identity is one of the most liberating discoveries you can make, because it immediately reduces the personal charge around all mental activity. Teaching number 91 reveals why most people find it difficult to live with paradox and complexity. The thinking mind prefers clear categories, simple explanations, and linear solutions. But life is often paradoxical, complex, and mysterious in ways that can't be reduced to mental formulas. When you try to fit reality into mental boxes that are too small, you create internal tension and confusion. Learning to live comfortably with paradox and mystery is a sign of spiritual maturity. You can hold opposing truths simultaneously. You can act decisively while acknowledging uncertainty. You can love deeply while accepting impermanence. This capacity to embrace complexity without needing to resolve it mentally brings tremendous peace and flexibility to daily life. Teaching number 92 introduces the concept of creative response as an alternative to reactive patterns. When challenging situations arise, most people respond from conditioned patterns based on past experience. But the Buddha taught that each moment is unique and often calls for a creative response that hasn't been used before. This creative intelligence emerges when you're not locked into habitual mental patterns. Instead of automatically analysing situations according to familiar categories, you remain open to fresh possibilities and innovative solutions. This creativity isn't just about artistic expression, but about responding to life situations with originality and wisdom, rather than mechanical repetition of old patterns. Teaching number 93 reveals something profound about the relationship between individual practice and collective transformation. When you work on your own patterns of overthinking and mental suffering, you're not just helping yourself, you're contributing to a shift in collective consciousness that makes it easier for others to find peace as well. The Buddha understood that consciousness is not isolated but interconnected in ways that aren't always visible. Your inner work creates ripple effects that extend far beyond your personal experience. This understanding can provide additional motivation for addressing your own mental patterns while also removing the pressure to heal perfectly or quickly. Teaching number 94 introduces us to the art of conscious rest as a foundation for mental clarity. Most people have forgotten how to rest deeply because they fill all quiet moments with mental activity or external stimulation. But the Buddha taught that genuine rest is not just the absence of activity, but a positive state of receptive awareness. Conscious rest allows your nervous system to reset, your mind to process experiences naturally, and your deeper wisdom to emerge. This rest is different from entertainment or distraction. It's a quality of open, relaxed presence that doesn't need to be filled with anything in particular. Learning to rest consciously is one of the most effective ways to interrupt patterns of compulsive thinking. Teaching number 95 reveals why most people struggle with the concept of surrendering control. When you're overthinking, you're usually trying to control outcomes through mental effort. The idea of surrendering this control can feel terrifying because it challenges your sense of agency and security. But the Buddha taught that true control comes from aligning with the natural flow of life rather than fighting against it. Surrender doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up your power to influence situations. It means recognizing what's actually within your control and what isn't, then focusing your energy where it can be most effective. This discrimination between what you can and cannot control is one of the most practical forms of wisdom you can develop. Teaching number 96 introduces the concept of natural authority as it emerges from authentic presence rather than mental knowledge or social position. When you're no longer driven by compulsive thinking, you naturally begin to speak and act from a deeper source of wisdom that others can sense and trust. This natural authority doesn't depend on having all the answers or being perfect. It comes from being genuinely present, honest about what you know and don't know, and responsive to what each situation actually needs. People are drawn to this authentic presence because it offers something real in a world full of superficial interactions and mental performances. Teaching number 97 reveals something surprising about the relationship between simplicity and sophistication. When you're overthinking, you often believe that complex require complex solutions. But the Buddha taught problems that the most profound solutions are usually elegantly simple, though they may require sophisticated understanding to implement. This simplicity isn't simplistic or naive. It's the simplicity that emerges on the other side of complexity, after you've understood the deeper patterns and principles that govern situations. Often, the most effective response to a complicated situation is surprisingly simple once you see through the mental elaborations to what's actually essential. Teaching number 98 introduces us to the profound practice of loving your own mind, even when it's creating suffering through overthinking. Most people have an adversarial relationship with their minds, fighting against thoughts and judging themselves for mental patterns they don't like. But the Buddha taught that this internal conflict only creates more suffering. When you bring genuine love and compassion to your thinking mind, even when it's agitated or confused, something beautiful happens. The mind begins to relax and settle naturally, like a frightened animal that finally feels safe. This self-compassion doesn't indulge harmful patterns, but it creates the safety and acceptance that allows natural healing to occur. Teaching number 99 reveals why most people find it difficult to trust the process of life itself. When you're caught in overthinking, you're essentially saying that you don't trust life to unfold appropriately without your constant mental management. You believe that through enough analysis and preparation, you can somehow guarantee positive outcomes and prevent all problems. But the Buddha taught that life has its own intelligence and natural timing that far exceeds what individual thinking can comprehend or control. This doesn't mean becoming irresponsible or passive, but it does mean recognizing that your role is to respond skillfully to what arises rather than trying to control what arises. This trust in the process of life can provide tremendous relief from the burden of trying to manage everything mentally. Teaching number 100 introduces the concept of conscious dying to old identities that no longer serve your growth and well-being. When you've been identified with being someone who overthinks, who worries constantly, or who needs to have everything figured out, letting go of these identities can feel like a kind of death. But the Buddha taught that this death is actually a rebirth into a more authentic way of being. This doesn't happen all at once, but gradually, as you stop reinforcing old patterns and begin to discover who you are when you're not lost in mental activity. This process of conscious transformation requires courage because you're letting go of familiar ways of being without knowing exactly what will emerge in their place. Teaching number 101 reveals something profound about the relationship between individual healing and service to others. When you free yourself from patterns of compulsive thinking and mental suffering, you naturally become more available to support others in their own healing journey. Your presence becomes a gift that can help others find their own path to peace. This service doesn't require becoming a teacher or healer in any formal sense. It happens naturally through the quality of presence you bring to all your relationships and interactions. When you're not caught up in your own mental drama, you can listen more deeply, respond more wisely, and offer the kind of authentic support that actually helps others rather than just reinforcing their problems. Teaching number 102 introduces us to the art of conscious completion as an alternative to the mental habit of leaving things unfinished or unresolved. Many patterns of overthinking are maintained by a backlog of incomplete experiences, unfinished conversations, unprocessed emotions, or unresolved situations that continue to demand mental attention. Learning to complete experiences consciously, whether through direct action, internal processing, or conscious letting go, clears space in your mental and emotional field. This doesn't mean forcing resolution where it's not possible, but it does mean taking responsibility for your own internal completion rather than waiting for external circumstances to provide closure. Teaching number 103 reveals why most people remain attached to their mental suffering even when they consciously want to be free. The Buddha observed that suffering often provides a sense of identity, purpose, and even superiority that can be difficult to release. Being the person who thinks deeply about problems can feel more meaningful than simply being present and content. This attachment to suffering is usually unconscious, which is why it's important to examine your motivations honestly. Are you actually committed to finding peace, or are you more committed to being seen as someone who struggles with complex problems? This kind of self-inquiry requires courage, but can reveal hidden obstacles to genuine freedom. Teaching number 104 introduces the concept of natural wisdom as it emerges when the mind becomes thinking, quiet and receptive. Most people have been so conditioned to rely on analytical thinking that they've forgotten about the intuitive intelligence that's always available when you're present and open. This natural wisdom doesn't come from accumulating more information or thinking harder about problems. It emerges from a quality of spacious awareness that can sense what's needed in each situation without having to figure it out mentally. This wisdom is practical and reliable, though it often suggests responses that the thinking mind wouldn't have considered. Teaching number 105 reveals something surprising about the relationship between effort and grace in the process of spiritual growth. When you're trying to overcome overthinking through willpower and mental strategies, you're often working against the natural flow of healing rather than with it. But when you align your efforts with the natural intelligence of life, grace begins to support your efforts in unexpected ways. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up personal responsibility for your growth. It means learning to recognize when you're forcing outcomes through excessive effort and when you're allowing natural healing processes to unfold with your skillful support. This balance between effort and grace is an art that develops through practice and sensitivity. Teaching number 106 introduces us to the profound understanding that your true nature is already whole and complete. When you're caught in overthinking, you're usually trying to fix, improve, or complete something that feels broken or inadequate. But the Buddha taught that your essential nature lacks nothing and needs no improvement. This doesn't mean that growth and learning aren't valuable, but it does mean recognizing that your worth and completeness don't depend on resolving all your mental patterns or achieving particular states of mind. You are already whole, and this wholeness can be recognized even in the midst of temporary mental turbulence. Teaching number 107 reveals why most spiritual practices fail to provide lasting freedom from overthinking. They often become another form of mental activity, another way of trying to achieve particular states or outcomes through effort and technique. But the Buddha taught that true spiritual practice is more about removing obstacles to your natural state than about creating something new. This means approaching practice with a quality of relaxed attentiveness rather than goal-oriented striving. Whether you're meditating, doing yoga, or engaging in any other spiritual activity, the key is to maintain connection with the awareness that's already peaceful rather than trying to create peace through the practice itself. Teaching number 108 brings us to the ultimate understanding that the seeker and the sought are not two different things. When you're searching for peace through mental effort, you're looking for something that you already are. The Buddha's final teaching points to the recognition that what you've been seeking through all your thinking and analysing is actually the very awareness that's been present throughout the entire search. This recognition doesn't come through more thinking or more complex understanding. It's a simple shift in perception, like realising that what you thought was a snake in the dim light was actually just a rope. The peace you've been seeking was never absent. It was simply obscured by the mental activity of seeking itself. This is the end of the spiritual search and the beginning of living from your natural state of awareness and peace. This recognition isn't something you need to achieve or work toward. It's available right now, in this moment, as you listen to these words. The awareness that knows you're listening, that knows thoughts are arising and passing away, that knows when you're caught in mental loops and when you're free from them. This awareness is what you truly are. It's not something you possess, it's what you are at the deepest level. When this recognition stabilizes, overthinking doesn't disappear entirely, but it loses its grip on you. Thoughts continue to arise, but they're like waves on the surface of a vast ocean. The ocean remains undisturbed regardless of what's happening on the surface. You begin to live from this oceanic awareness, rather than being tossed around by every wave of thought and emotion that passes through. This is why all the previous teachings have been pointing toward this moment of recognition. Every technique, every insight, every practice has been designed to help you see what was already here all along. The Buddha didn't become enlightened by adding something to himself. He became enlightened by recognizing what he had never lost. Now, as we near the completion of these 108 teachings, you might notice something interesting happening in your own experience. Perhaps the mental chatter has quieted somewhat. Perhaps there's a quality of spaciousness that wasn't there when we began. This isn't because you've learnt something new, but because you've remembered something ancient, something that predates all your mental conditioning and learned patterns. The Buddha taught that this recognition of your true nature is the ultimate medicine for all forms of mental suffering. When you know yourself as awareness itself, rather than as a collection of thoughts and emotions, the entire basis for overthinking dissolves. There's no separate self that needs to figure everything out, no isolated individual who must solve all problems through mental efforts. This doesn't mean you become inactive or disengaged from life. In fact, the opposite often happens. When you're no longer caught up in endless mental loops, you become more responsive to what life is actually presenting. You can think clearly when thinking is needed, feel deeply when emotions arise, and rest peacefully when nothing needs to be done. This natural responsiveness is what the Buddha called right action. But here's something this ultimate that might surprise you about teaching. It's not the end of your journey, it's actually the beginning. When you recognize your true nature as awareness itself, you're not graduating from the human experience, you're finally beginning to live it fully. You still have preferences, you still face challenges, you still need to make decisions and navigate relationships. But you do all of this from a fundamentally different place. Instead of approaching life from the narrow perspective of a separate self, trying to protect and enhance itself through mental activity, you respond from the vast perspective of awareness that includes everything. This shift in perspective changes everything about how you experience daily life, even when the external circumstances remain exactly the same. The grocery store checkout line becomes an opportunity to practice presence rather than a trigger for impatience. Traffic jams become chances to notice what arises in awareness rather than sources of frustration. Difficult conversations become explorations in authentic communication rather than battles to be won through superior arguments. Every ordinary moment becomes extraordinary when met with this quality of aware presence. This is perhaps the most practical aspect of these teachings. They don't require you to retreat from the world or spend years in intensive meditation practice. They can be applied immediately in whatever circumstances you find yourself. The awareness that recognizes overthinking is the same awareness that can bring wisdom to any situation you encounter. When someone criticizes you, instead of immediately defending yourself or launching into mental analysis about their motivations, you can simply notice what's arising in awareness. Often, you'll discover that there's space around the initial reaction, and from this space, you can choose how to respond, rather than being driven by automatic patterns. When you're facing a difficult decision, instead of trying to think your way to the perfect choice, you can rest in the awareness that knows when you're forcing outcomes and when you're allowing natural intelligence to guide you. This doesn't guarantee that every decision will have perfect results, but it ensures that your choices arise from wisdom rather than fear. When anxiety arises about future events, instead of getting caught in elaborate worry scenarios, You can recognize the anxiety as a temporary phenomenon arising in awareness. You can feel it fully without being consumed by it. And often this direct experience of anxiety reveals what action, if any, needs to be taken in the present moment. The Buddha understood that these teachings work because they align with the actual nature of reality rather than fighting against it. When you stop trying to control your mental experience through force, and instead learn to work with the natural intelligence of awareness, everything becomes easier. Not because your problems disappear, but because you're no longer adding unnecessary suffering to whatever challenges you're facing. This brings us to one of the most important aspects of integrating these teachings into daily life. The transformation isn't usually dramatic or sudden. Most people don't have a single moment of enlightenment after which all mental suffering disappears forever. Instead, there's a gradual shift in how you relate to your experience, a growing recognition of the awareness that's always been present. Some days you'll remember these teachings easily and find yourself naturally resting in peaceful awareness. Other days you might get completely caught up in mental loops and only remember the possibility of freedom hours later. This is perfectly natural and doesn't indicate that you're doing anything wrong. The path of awakening includes both remembering and forgetting, clarity and confusion, peace and agitation. The key is to meet all of these experiences with the same compassionate awareness. When you're peaceful, you don't need to cling to that peace or worry about losing it. When you're agitated, you don't need to judge yourself or desperately try to return to calm. Everything that arises in awareness is welcomed as part of the natural flow of experience. This welcoming attitude is itself a form of practice. Instead of dividing your experiences into good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable, spiritual and unspiritual, you learn to meet everything with the same open awareness. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to outcomes or abandoning discernment about what's healthy and unhealthy. It means approaching all experiences from a place of fundamental acceptance rather than resistance. When you live from this place of acceptance, something remarkable happens. The energy that was previously consumed by fighting against your experience becomes expression, available for creative, meaningful relationships, and contributing to the world in ways that align with your deepest values. You discover capacities and possibilities that were hidden when you were caught up in mental struggle. Many people find that when they stop overthinking, their natural creativity begins to flow more freely. Artists create more authentically. Entrepreneurs develop more innovative solutions. Parents respond more wisely to their children's needs. And friends offer more genuine support to those they care about. This isn't because thinking becomes less important, but because it finds its proper place as one tool among many rather than the dominant force in your life. The Buddha also taught that this inner transformation naturally leads to greater compassion for others who are still caught in patterns of mental suffering. When you remember what it was like to be trapped in endless thinking loops, you can offer understanding and support to others who are struggling with similar patterns. Your presence becomes a form of teaching, not through preaching or giving advice, but through embodying the possibility of peace. This compassionate response to others' suffering is one of the natural fruits of genuine spiritual development. You don't have to force yourself to be more loving or try to become a better person through moral effort. When you're no longer caught up in your own mental drama, love and wisdom arise naturally as expressions of your true nature. However, it's important to understand that this compassion includes healthy boundaries. Recognizing your true nature as awareness doesn't mean sacrificing your well-being for others or allowing people to treat you disrespectfully. True compassion is wise compassion that knows when to say yes and when to say no, when to engage and when to step back, when to help and when to allow others to find their own way. As you continue to integrate these teachings, you might notice that your relationships begin to change in subtle but significant ways. When you're no longer driven by the need to be understood, prove yourself right, or control how others perceive you, your interactions become more authentic and relaxed. You can listen more deeply because you're not busy formulating your response. You can disagree without becoming defensive because your sense of worth isn't threatened by different opinions. This transformation in relationships often happens gradually, and some people in your life might not understand or appreciate the changes at first. When you stop sessions, some participating in gossip, drama, or complaint relationships might feel uncomfortable or even end. This can be challenging, but it's often necessary for your continued growth and well-being. At the same time, you'll likely find yourself attracting new relationships that are based on authenticity rather than shared neuroses or mutual reinforcement of limiting patterns. These new connections often have a quality of ease and depth that you might not have experienced before, because they're based on recognition of what's real in each person rather than identification with personality patterns or social roles. The workplace can be another area where these teachings prove particularly valuable. Instead of getting caught up in office politics, competitive dynamics, or stress about performance evaluations, you can focus on doing quality work while maintaining your inner equilibrium. This doesn't mean becoming less ambitious or caring less about professional success, but it does mean holding these goals lightly rather than making your happiness dependent on achieving them. When you approach work from this centered place, you often become more effective rather than less. Clear thinking emerges naturally when the mind isn't clouded by anxiety and overthinking. Creative solutions appear when you're not forcing outcomes through mental effort. Leadership qualities develop organically when you're responding from wisdom rather than reacting from insecurity. The same principles apply to financial concerns, health challenges, family dynamics, and all the other areas of life where overthinking commonly arises. Instead of trying to think your way to security, health, or harmony, you learn to respond skillfully to whatever situations arise while maintaining your connection to the peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. This approach to life's challenges requires a fundamental shift in how you define success and failure. When your well-being is rooted in awareness rather than outcomes, you can engage fully with goals and projects while remaining unattached to specific results. This doesn't mean becoming careless or unmotivated, but it does mean finding satisfaction in the quality of your engagement rather than only in the achievement of desired outcomes. Perhaps most importantly, these teachings offer a completely different relationship to time itself. When you're not lost in mental time travel, constantly reviewing the past or rehearsing the future, you discover the richness and completeness that's available in each present moment. This doesn't mean never thinking about past or future, but it does mean doing so consciously and purposefully rather than compulsively. The present moment, when fully inhabited, contains everything you need for peace and fulfillment. Not because your circumstances are perfect, but because the awareness that knows your circumstances is inherently complete and lacking nothing. This recognition transforms ordinary activities into opportunities for presence and connection with the sacred dimension of existence. Washing dishes becomes a meditation on the flow of water and the simple satisfaction of completing a task. Walking becomes an opportunity to feel your connection to the earth and notice the beauty that surrounds you. Eating becomes a practice of gratitude and mindful attention to nourishment. Every ordinary activity can become extraordinary when approached with presence and awareness. This doesn't require special techniques or complicated practices. It simply requires remembering that awareness is always available and that this awareness is what you truly are. Sometimes this remembering happens naturally, and sometimes it requires gentle intention to return attention to the present moment. Both are perfectly valid parts of the ongoing practice of awakening. As we approach the completion of these 108 teachings, it's worth reflecting on what has actually happened during our time together. You haven't learned anything that wasn't already true. You haven't acquired any new capabilities that you didn't already possess. What you've done is remembered what you temporarily forgot, recognized what was always present, and returned home to your own true nature. This return home isn't a destination you arrive at once and then maintain forever. It's an ongoing recognition that deepens and stabilizes over time. Some moments you'll feel completely at peace and connected to your true nature. Other moments you'll forget entirely and get caught up in old patterns of thinking and reacting. Both experiences are part of the natural rhythm of awakening. The invitation is to be gentle with yourself throughout this process. There's no perfect way to apply these teachings, no timeline you must follow, no standard you must meet to be worthy of peace and freedom. Your unique path of awakening will unfold in its own way and its own timing. And this unfolding is itself perfect even when it doesn't match your mental expectations about how it should happen. What matters most is not the dramatic spiritual experiences or the permanent elimination of all mental turbulence, but the growing recognition that you are the awareness in which all experiences arise and pass away. This awareness is your refuge, your strength, your peace, and your true identity. It's what you are when you strip away all the layers of conditioning, all the learned patterns, all the stories about who you think you should be. This awareness doesn't need to be protected, enhanced, or improved. It doesn't need to achieve anything or become anything other than what it already is. It's timelessly present, infinitely spacious, and naturally peaceful. When you recognize yourself as this awareness, the search for peace through mental effort finally comes to an end. Not because you found what you were looking for, but because you've realized you never lost it in the first place. The Buddha's final words were reportedly, "Work out your salvation with diligence." This isn't a call to more effort or struggle, but an invitation to recognize that your freedom is your own responsibility and your own gift to yourself. No one can awaken for you, just as no one can sleep for you or breathe for you. This recognition of your own inherent freedom is both the ultimate teaching and the beginning of true life. As we move deeper into this profound journey of liberation, you may find yourself wondering how these ancient insights translate into the messy reality of modern life. The Buddha understood something that most self-help approaches miss entirely. Transformation isn't about perfecting your circumstances or eliminating every uncomfortable thought. It's about discovering the unshakable peace that exists regardless of what's happening in your mental and emotional landscape. Teaching number 109 reveals why most people exhaust themselves trying to find the perfect meditation technique or spiritual practice. When you're caught in overthinking, you often approach spirituality as another problem to solve, another system to master through mental effort. You read countless books, attend workshops, download meditation apps, all hoping to find the technique that will finally give you the peace you're seeking. But here's what the Buddha discovered that changes everything. The peace you're seeking through spiritual techniques is actually the very awareness that's trying all these techniques. It's like using a flashlight to search for light when the flashlight itself is the source of illumination. The searcher and the sought are not separate entities. You are already what you're looking for. This doesn't mean that practices and techniques are useless. They can be valuable tools for recognizing what's already present. But when you approach them from the understanding that you're uncovering rather than creating peace, everything changes. Instead of desperately trying to achieve particular states of mind, you can use practices as opportunities to notice the awareness that's observing all states of mind. Teaching number 110 introduces us to something that might surprise you about the nature of spiritual progress. The Buddha taught that genuine awakening often looks like becoming more ordinary rather than more special. When you're no longer caught up in mental drama, you don't develop supernatural powers or become a mystical being floating above human concerns. You become more naturally yourself. This ordinariness is actually extraordinary because it's free from the artificial complexity that comes from overthinking and self-consciousness. You respond to situations naturally and appropriately, without the layers of mental commentary that usually complicates simple interactions. A conversation is just a conversation, not an opportunity to prove your worth or analyze the other person's psychology. Eating is just eating, not a chance to judge yourself or worry about health implications. Teaching number 111 reveals something profound about the relationship between wisdom and innocence. When your mind is constantly analyzing and categorizing experiences, you lose the capacity for fresh perception. You see everything through filters of past experience and future expectations. But the Buddha taught that true wisdom includes a quality of innocent openness that can meet each moment without preconceptions. This innocent wisdom isn't naive or ignorant. It's the sophistication that comes from recognizing the limitations of mental knowledge and remaining open to direct a sunset doesn't need experience. A child watching to understand atmospheric optics to be moved by beauty. Similarly, you don't need to analyze every experience to respond wisely to what life presents. Teaching number 112 introduces the concept of effortless effort, which sounds like a contradiction, but points to something essential about skillful living. When you're overthinking, you're usually applying tremendous mental effort that accomplishes very little. You exhaust yourself trying to figure out things that can't be figured out, control things that can't be controlled, and understand things that must be experienced directly to be known. Effortless effort means aligning your actions with natural intelligence rather than forcing outcomes through willpower. Like a skilled dancer who moves gracefully without rigid control, or a masterful musician who plays beautifully without overthinking every note, you can learn to navigate life with this quality of relaxed effectiveness. The effort is real and focused, but it flows from understanding rather than struggle. Teaching number 113 reveals why most people find it difficult to trust their own natural responses to situations. When you've been conditioned to believe that everything must be figured out mentally before you can act, trusting your immediate responses can feel dangerous or irresponsible. But the Buddha taught that your deepest wisdom often expresses itself through spontaneous knowing rather than deliberate analysis. This doesn't mean acting impulsively or ignoring practical considerations. It means learning to distinguish between reactive impulses driven by fear or desire and responsive actions arising from clear awareness. Your natural intelligence knows the difference between helpful thinking and mental spinning, between appropriate action and compulsive doing, between genuine intuition and wishful thinking. Teaching number 114 introduces us to the art of holding paradox without needing to resolve it mentally. Life is full of apparent contradictions that the thinking mind wants to resolve into neat categories. You can be content with your life while still working toward positive changes. You can accept difficult emotions while taking action to address their underlying causes. You can love someone deeply while maintaining healthy boundaries. When you try to resolve these paradoxes through mental analysis, you usually end up creating false either-or choices that don't reflect the complexity of real situations. But when you learn to rest in the spacious awareness that can hold contradictions without anxiety, you discover that life's paradoxes often contain important truths that can't be captured by linear thinking. Teaching number 100 and about the relationship to 15 reveals something surprising between personal healing and collective transformation. The Buddha understood that individual consciousness and collective consciousness are not separate phenomena. When you heal your own patterns of mental suffering, you contribute to healing in the larger human family. Your inner peace becomes a gift to everyone you encounter. This happens not through preaching or trying to fix others, but through the quality of presence you bring to all your interactions. When you're not caught up in your own mental drama, you become more available to really see and hear other people. Your non-reactive presence can help others find their own capacity for peace, even if they've never heard these teachings explicitly. Teaching number 116 introduces the concept of conscious aging as an antidote to the mental suffering that often accompanies getting older. Many people spend enormous mental energy trying to prevent, hide, or worry about the natural aging process. But the Buddha taught that every stage of life offers unique opportunities for wisdom and freedom when approached with awareness rather than resistance. Aging can become a powerful spiritual practice when you use it as an opportunity to let go of identities and attachments that no longer serve you. The gradual release of physical capabilities, social roles, and future plans can reveal the timeless awareness that was never dependent on any of these temporary conditions. Instead of seeing aging as loss, you can recognize it as a natural stripping away of everything that isn't essential. Teaching number 117 reveals why most people remain trapped in cycles of seeking approval and validation from others. When you're caught in overthinking, you're often mentally rehearsing conversations, imagining how others perceive you, or trying to figure out what you need to do to be accepted and appreciated. But this mental activity is based on a fundamental misunderstanding about where your worth comes from. The Buddha taught that your value is inherent and doesn't depend on external validation. This isn't just a nice philosophical idea, it's a recognition that can be directly experienced when you stop looking outside yourself for confirmation of your worth. When you know your own essential okayness, you can engage with others authentically rather than trying to manage their impressions of you. Teaching number 118 introduces us to the profound practice of conscious grief as a pathway to greater aliveness. Many patterns of overthinking are actually ways of avoiding the natural grief that comes from living in an impermanent world. Instead of feeling the sadness of loss directly, you escape into mental analysis, blame, regret, or fantasy about how things could have been different. But grief, when experienced consciously, is not an obstacle to peace. It's a natural response to love in a world where everything changes. When you allow yourself to feel grief fully without mental elaboration, it moves through you and often transforms into a deeper appreciation for what's present. The heart that can grieve deeply is the same heart that can love deeply. Teaching number 119 reveals something that might shock you about the relationship between success and inner peace. The Buddha understood that external achievements, no matter how impressive, cannot provide lasting satisfaction if you're still caught in patterns of mental suffering. You can have everything you thought you wanted and still feel empty inside if you haven't discovered the fulfillment that's available, independent of circumstances. This doesn't mean that worldly success is bad or that you should avoid pursuing meaningful goals. It means recognizing that achievements are temporary experiences arising in the permanent awareness that you truly are. When you find your security in this awareness, rather than in external accomplishments, you can enjoy success without being attached to it and face setbacks without being devastated by them. Teaching number 120 introduces the concept of natural morality as it emerges from awakened awareness. When you're no longer driven by compulsive thinking and reactive emotions, ethical behavior arises naturally, rather than being imposed through rules and regulations. You don't need to force yourself to be kind, honest, or compassionate, because these qualities are natural expressions of your true nature. This organic morality is often more reliable than rule-based ethics because it responds to the actual needs of each situation rather than following rigid formulas. It knows when kindness means saying yes and when it means saying no, when honesty helps and when silence is more appropriate, when compassion requires action and when it calls for allowing others to learn from their own experiences. Teaching number 121 reveals why most people find it difficult to receive love and support from others. When you're caught in overthinking, you often believe that you must earn love through performance, that you're only worthy of care when you're perfect, or that accepting help makes you weak or burdensome. These beliefs create barriers to the very connections that could provide healing and support. The Buddha taught that your capacity to receive love is directly related to your recognition of your own inherent lovability. When you know yourself as awareness itself, you realize that this awareness is inherently precious and worthy of care. This recognition allows you to receive love gracefully, without feeling like you need to earn it or prove that you deserve it. Teaching number 122 introduces us to the art of conscious celebration as an antidote to the mental habit of minimizing joy. Many people who struggle with overthinking have difficulty fully enjoying positive experiences because their minds immediately start analyzing what could go wrong, when the good times will end, or whether they truly deserve to be happy. But the Buddha taught that joy is as much a part of reality as sorrow, and both deserve to be experienced fully. Conscious celebration doesn't mean forcing happiness or denying difficulties. It means being present with joy when it arises, allowing it to fill your awareness completely without the mental commentary that diminishes its impact. Teaching number 123 reveals something profound about the relationship between creativity and spiritual awakening. When you're no longer caught up in mental loops and self-consciousness, your natural creativity begins to flow more freely. This isn't necessarily artistic creativity, though it might include that. It's the creative intelligence that knows how to respond freshly to each situation without falling into habitual patterns. This creativity expresses itself in how you solve problems, navigate relationships, make decisions, and engage with daily activities. Instead of automatically doing things the way they've always been done, you remain open to new possibilities and innovative approaches. This creative responsiveness makes life more interesting and often more effective. Teaching number 124 introduces the concept of spiritual maturity as it relates to working with difficult people and situations. Early in the journey of awakening, there's often an idealistic belief that inner peace means everything will become harmonious and easy. But the Buddha taught that genuine spiritual development includes learning to maintain your center, even when surrounded by chaos or negativity. This maturity doesn't mean becoming hard or insensitive. It means developing the capacity to remain compassionate and wise even when others are reactive, to stay centered even when circumstances are turbulent, to respond skillfully even when you're being treated unfairly. This is the real test of spiritual understanding, not how peaceful you can be in perfect conditions, but how much wisdom you can access in challenging situations. Teaching number 125 reveals why most people struggle with the concept of surrender, especially when facing serious problems or crises. Surrender is often misunderstood as giving up, becoming passive, or accepting harmful situations without resistance. But the Buddha taught that true surrender is actually the foundation for more effective action, because it aligns you with reality rather than keeping you trapped in resistance to what is. When you surrender to the reality of a difficult situation, you stop wasting energy fighting against what has already happened, and can focus on responding wisely to what needs attention now. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or failing to protect yourself. It means working with the situation as it actually is rather than as you wish it were. Teaching number 126 introduces us to the profound understanding that your thoughts about spirituality are not spirituality itself. Many people get caught up in collecting spiritual concepts, comparing different teachings, or trying to figure out the perfect spiritual path through mental analysis. But the Buddha taught that true spirituality is about direct experience rather than intellectual understanding. This doesn't mean that teachings and concepts are useless, but it does mean recognizing them as pointers toward experience rather than substitutes for it. You can understand everything about swimming without ever getting in the water, but you won't know what swimming is like until you experience it directly. Similarly, you can study spirituality extensively without ever touching the peace that spiritual teachings are designed to reveal. Teaching number 127 reveals something that might surprise you about the role of doubt in spiritual development. Most people try to eliminate doubt because obstacle to faith, they believe it's an understanding. But the Buddha taught that there are two kinds of doubt: neurotic doubt that creates paralysis and suffering, and intelligent doubt that questions assumptions and opens new possibilities. Intelligent doubt asks whether your beliefs are actually true, whether your mental patterns are serving you, whether your spiritual practices are creating genuine freedom or just more sophisticated forms of mental activity. This kind of doubt is motivated by love of truth rather than fear of uncertainty, and it can be one of your most valuable tools for discovering genuine wisdom. Teaching number 128 introduces the concept of natural authority that emerges when you're no longer driven by the need to prove yourself or control how others perceive you. This authority doesn't come from position, knowledge, or power over others. It comes from the simple authenticity of being genuinely yourself without pretense or performance. People are naturally drawn to this quality because it's so rare in a world where most interactions involve some level of image management or strategic presentation. When you're not trying to be anything other than what you are, others feel permission to be authentic as well. This creates deeper connections and more meaningful exchanges than relationships based on mutual performance. Teaching number 129 reveals why most people find it difficult to maintain inner peace when faced with injustice or cruelty. The natural response to witnessing or experiencing harmful behaviour is anger, and many people believe that losing this anger means becoming passive or indifferent to suffering. But the Buddha taught that you can respond powerfully to injustice without losing your inner equilibrium. This balanced response comes from acting from love of justice rather than hatred of injustice. The difference is subtle but profound. When you act from love, your actions are more likely to create positive change because they're not contaminated by the very energy you're trying to transform. When you act from hatred, even if your cause is just, you often perpetuate cycles of reactivity and conflict. Teaching number 130 introduces us to the art of conscious leadership, whether you're leading a family, a team, an organization, or simply leading your own life. Most leadership approaches focus on strategy, communication skills, or management techniques. But the Buddha taught that the most effective leadership flows from inner clarity and genuine care for the well-being of all involved. When you're not caught up in ego-driven agendas or mental power struggles, you can see situations more clearly and respond to what's actually needed rather than what your conditioning tells you should happen. This kind of leadership often appears effortless because it's aligned with natural intelligence rather than forcing outcomes through willpower and manipulation. Teaching number 131 reveals something profound about the relationship between individual freedom and collective responsibility. When you're no longer trapped in patterns of mental suffering, you don't become selfish or disconnected from others. Instead, you often become more genuinely caring because your actions arise from love, rather than obligation, fear, or the need to maintain a good self-image. This authentic care expresses itself differently for different people. Some might become involved in social causes, others might focus on their families, and still others might serve through their work or creative expression. The form isn't as important as the quality of genuine care that motivates the action. Teaching number 132 introduces the concept of conscious completion as it applies to life transitions. Whether you're ending a relationship, changing careers, moving to a new location, or facing any other major life change, the way you complete old chapters affects how clearly you can begin new ones. Most people carry unfinished emotional business from one phase of life to another, which creates mental clutter and prevents fresh beginnings. Conscious completion doesn't mean tying up every loose end perfectly, but it does mean acknowledging what was meaningful about what you're leaving behind, processing any unresolved emotions, and consciously releasing what no longer serves your growth. This creates space for new possibilities to emerge naturally. Teaching number 133 reveals why most people find it challenging to live with uncertainty about their life purpose or spiritual path. The thinking mind wants clear direction, definite goals, and measurable progress toward predetermined outcomes. But the Buddha taught that genuine purpose often emerges organically from being fully present with whatever life is offering right now. Instead of trying to figure out your ultimate purpose through mental analysis, you can trust that meaningful direction will become clear as you engage authentically with each day's opportunities and challenges. Purpose isn't something you find once and then follow forever. It's something that evolves naturally as you grow and as circumstances change. Teaching number 134 introduces us to the profound practice of loving your enemies, not as a moral obligation, but as a pathway to freedom. When you're caught in resentment or hatred towards someone who has harmed you, you're keeping that person alive in your consciousness in a way that continues to cause suffering. The Buddha taught that this ongoing mental relationship with your enemies hurts you far more than it hurts them. Loving your enemies doesn't mean approving of harmful behavior or failing to protect yourself from further harm. It means releasing the mental and emotional charge around past hurts so that they no longer control your present experience. This release is a gift you give yourself, not a favor you do for those who have wronged you. Teaching number 135 reveals something surprising about the relationship between spiritual practice and everyday responsibilities. Many people believe that spiritual development requires withdrawing from worldly concerns or spending extensive time in meditation and study. But the Buddha taught that every ordinary activity can become a spiritual practice when approached with the right understanding. Changing diapers, paying bills, sitting in traffic, having difficult conversations, dealing with bureaucracy, all of these mundane activities offer opportunities to practice presence, patience, compassion, and wisdom. The quality of awareness you bring to ordinary activities is more important than the activities themselves. A person washing dishes with full presence might be more spiritually engaged than someone sitting in meditation while lost in mental fantasies. Teaching number 136 introduces the concept of natural healing as it applies to psychological and emotional wounds. The Buddha understood that the same intelligence that heals physical injuries also works to heal mental and emotional trauma when it's not interfered with by excessive mental activity. Most psychological healing happens through feeling rather than thinking, through being present with wounded parts of yourself rather than analysing them. This doesn't mean that therapy, counselling, or other forms of professional support aren't valuable. It means recognising that the ultimate healing happens when be present you can with your own experience without trying to fix, change, or understand everything mentally. Your awareness itself has healing properties when it's brought to areas of suffering with compassion rather than judgment. These 108 teachings have taken you on a journey from the prison of overthinking to the freedom of awakened awareness. You've discovered that thoughts are not your identity, that peace is not something to achieve, but something you already are, and that the very awareness seeking liberation is itself the liberation you've been seeking. As you move forward, remember that this isn't the end of your path, but the beginning of living from your true nature. The peace you've touched in these moments together is always available, waiting patiently for your return home to the vast, open sky of consciousness that you have never actually left.